Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're talking about the Galaxy A72 and the Galaxy A52, and specifically what the differences actually are that constitute such a large price difference. So these are both Samsung mid-range phones, and as you can see here, they look almost completely identical. The same colors, the same materials, the same camera bump, the same resolution, refresh rate. Really, the list goes on with the similarities, which leads you to wonder what actually makes the A72 worth an extra $100. So in this video, I'm going to do a deep dive and talk about what the similarities and differences between these are to help you guys decide which one's actually the better buy. Because in the world of mid-range phones, it's a lot of times about which one gives you the most specs for the lowest price. It's really a game of value, and that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. So I want to start off looking at these physically. Like I said, on the back, you can see they're both the same material. They're both the same colors. There's 4 different colors for either one of them. And I would be willing to bet that if you were holding just one of these and the other one wasn't in the same room as you, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me accurately which one you were holding, or at least I can't tell the difference. They both feel very similar. I mean, yes, the A72 is slightly larger. The display on the front is 6.7 inches versus 6.5, but it's really a marginal difference. When you look at them side by side, you'll see they're really almost the same size. So it's not like you're paying for a huge size improvement there with the 72, and so there's gonna be some difference other than that, right? Looking at the right side, you'll see that they both have the same side key, the same volume rocker. On the bottom, they both have a headphone jack. They both have a dual speaker setup where you have a speaker on the earpiece and a speaker on the bottom. They both have a microphone on the bottom and on the top. They both have dual SIM. They have an SD card expandable storage on the top. They have the same storage on the inside, and they both have a USB Type-C port on the bottom that does support fast charging. And neither the A72 nor the A52 has wireless charging, so that's not the difference there. And when it comes to fast charging, like I said, they both support super fast charging, 25 watts. And the first main difference we're going to see is actually not the phone, but what comes in the box. So the A72 does come with that super fast charger from Samsung, whereas the A52 only comes with what they call an adaptive fast charger, substantially slower. But if you buy the A52 and you really want that fast charging or the super fast charging, you could buy the super fast charger for like $15 on Amazon. So obviously that's not worth the extra $100, but it starts to add up some extra value for the 72. Like I said, neither one has wireless charging on the back, obviously no reverse wireless charging either, but they do both have the same water resistance rating. This is a big positive here because we didn't see that in previous, really most other previous mid-range phones, so the IP67 water resistance is great to see on these. Flipping them over to the front, you'll see we have the selfie camera on the top. They're both 32 megapixel selfie cameras. Actually, now that I mentioned that, I realize I didn't mention anything about the rear cameras, and I'm actually going to talk about that later on because we will see a pretty significant difference there. Looking at the screens, 6.7 versus 6.5 inches, like I said, no significant difference there. They both are Full HD+, 800 nits, so very bright, very vibrant, Super AMOLED. Like, if there's one thing Samsung does really well, it's make good, vibrant, bright displays, and that's exactly what both of these have. The A72 has a fast refresh rate of 90 Hz, and so you think, oh, that's probably something they wouldn't put on the A52. Well, they actually did. They both have a 90 Hz refresh rate, which is great to see. It's kind of starting to seem like Samsung is giving the A52 just a lot of things that I thought they would admit. They really made it a good deal, which doesn't really incentivize you to buy the A72. Of course, we'll get into some more differences in a second, but so far on the outside, to summarize, they're basically the same phone. You have a very slight difference in size, but other than that, they're really the same phone on the outside. Okay, so let's start talking about the internal components of these phones, because once we start looking at those, well, actually nothing's really different there either. They both have the same processor, the Snapdragon 720G, and that was something I complained about in the A72 review, because for the extra $100 you spend on that, I was really hoping to have at least a slightly faster processor. It's something that these both have the same processor, which is great for the A52 because it is reasonably quick, but I'm not quite sure exactly why Samsung didn't put a slightly faster one in the A72. With that being said, they both have the same amount of storage, but the A52 does have one extra option for RAM, so you can get 4 gigabytes of RAM, 6 gigs, or 8 gigs on the 52, whereas I believe on the 72, they don't have the 4 gigs of RAM available, only 6 or 8. Realistically, I would recommend everybody should buy at least 6 gigs anyway. 4 is really a small amount for one of these phones, and So I don't really see that as any kind of substantial difference there. So with connectivity, from what I can tell, they both have the same Bluetooth, the same Wi-Fi, the same NFC, the same pretty much everything. And neither one of these has 5G, except the A52 does have a variant that is the A52 5G. Maybe they'll come out with an A72 5G eventually, we don't know, but the A52 5G is pretty much a completely different phone. They have a faster refresh rate on there, and a couple other things that are different. So for the purposes of this video, these are both not 5G compatible, both exactly the same. A subtle difference internally is that the A72 comes with a slightly larger battery of 5,000 milliamp hours versus 4,500 on the 52. And you could argue that the bigger screen might use a little bit more battery, but I think if you put them side by side and run a battery test, you'd probably get a slightly larger battery life on the A72, but it's going to be marginal. It's really not going to be that different. So that's another thing that's not really constituting that price difference. Okay, so that brings us to the cameras, which, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, is really the only substantial difference I see between these phones that would lead me to even consider buying the more expensive A72 instead of saving $100 for otherwise exactly the same phone. And looking at these cameras, the good news is they both have the same wide-angle lens, 64 megapixels. It's honestly a pretty good lens. And the same ultra-wide lens, which is 12 megapixels. They both have the same flash, the same video capabilities on both of these, the same selfie camera, and of course the same macro lens. But looking at that bottom lens, you'll see that the aperture size is very different. And so it's kind of interesting that rather than just adding something to the A72, they did a little swap there. I guess they just wanted them to look consistent, but on the A52, we actually have a depth camera, and then on the A72, that is a 3x telephoto lens, which in my opinion is far more useful, but we'll talk about what that trade-off actually means. So when you're zooming in on the A52, as you can see in this photo right here, you're going to be using the 64 megapixel main camera, which, because it's such a high resolution, you can zoom in digitally pretty far before the photos become useless. So it caps you out at 10x digital zoom, but a 2x zoom or maybe even a 4x zoom is still a relatively usable photo. Of course, when you're using the telephoto lens on the A72, it is actually optically, it does have an optical image stabilization, OIS. They both have OIS on the main lens, but this one has OIS also on that telephoto lens, so if you're zooming in, you can really stay stable on videos and keep good quality as you zoom in. Similarly with photos, you can zoom way in on your kid playing soccer or whatever and still very easily follow them without, no matter how shaky you are, it should be pretty easy to use. So it's very clear that taking any kind of zoomed in photos are going to look substantially better on the A72, and I think that definitely is a pretty big advantage of that one. But of course, you are losing that depth camera. I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. The depth camera is not something I've ever used, but it's something that you would maybe use, for example, in AR Doodle. So you can see right here that even though the A72 doesn't have a depth camera, it's still able to use AR Doodle. And from what I can tell, the augmented reality looks pretty much the same. They're able to use the other camera on this phone and really do the same exact thing. But you can see some examples right here, something that some people might wonder if that has any kind of impact on the portrait mode or the live focus mode. You can see that these two photos right here are both using the live focus mode on the main camera here. And so if the depth camera really made a difference for live focus photos, you would definitely be able to see that right here. And the fact is it really doesn't. Samsung got really good at edge detection now, not using a depth camera, so you really don't need that. And in many ways, the depth camera on the A52 is more of just a placeholder. It's more of something they just wanted to add there to make it look like it had more cameras and to make it look more consistent with the A72. But in a weird way, I kind of feel like adding that depth camera might kind of eat into their sales of the A72 because you really don't see any physical differences between these phones and nobody's gonna know which of the two you have except for you. So guys, really to summarize this video, the only main difference that I would focus on at all is going to be the camera difference, but of course there are other subtle differences. The charger in the box, the battery size of that, and the screen size, but all of those I would say are really negligible differences, and if you don't absolutely need a telephoto lens, I would say to pretty much everybody out there, save your money and just buy the A52. It's really a pretty good deal. And if you want to know more about either one of these phones, I have a full review of them and I'll put them in a link in the description. So head on down and check that out. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm Mike O'Brien. And if you are new here, consider liking and subscribing. I'll see you next time.